Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. James, over to you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on cyber resiliency, strengthening the public sector's defenses. I'm James McKenna, Vice President at Leadership Connect. I'll be moderating today's discussion, surrounded by a great group of panelists. Gotten to spend some time with all the panelists over the past week or two, and looking forward to the discussion here today. Today, really, we're going to be talking about best practices related to cyber resiliency specific to federal agencies, discussing some of the major threats that panelists have been seeing, what are they seeing as the best way to be prepared and to be protected from those threats, how to continually stay ahead of those threats, and how do we really share those best practices learned across government and across the organizations. There's a chat section for Q&A, so please feel free to drop questions in throughout for the panelists, and we'll be keeping an eye on those throughout the webinar today, and we'll also get to any of those at the end that we're not able to get to in real time. And we'll also have a few polls that pop up for the audience throughout the webinar today, so keep an eye out for those, and looking forward to seeing the audience's thoughts on a few topics. Quick background on myself, and then we'll go around as a round of introductions before getting into the main content here today. So James McKenna, been working with data and technology companies for 15 years or so, the last 7 of which are here at Leadership Connect. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Leadership Connect, we are used by about 1,200 organizations, 40,000-ish users who are across government agencies, contractors, academia, associations, policy community, all using us for some sort of solution geared towards cross-government collaboration in an effective and efficient manner. Pass over to the group for a quick round of introductions. Tyler, do you want to kick off?
Yep, happy to. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. My name is Tyler Carlin. I'm a director in KPMG's federal cyber practice. Been doing cybersecurity for about 15 years now, 10 of those with KPMG. I focus a lot on really all federal agencies around cybersecurity. So done a lot of work within the civilian market, with the defense market, and healthcare market within the government. So definitely looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Tyler. Holly, over to you.
Sure. I'm Holly Rollins. I'm with the firm Booz Allen Hamilton, and I've been with Booz Allen for 30 years. Booz Allen is the largest provider of cybersecurity services in North America. We do just under $3 billion annually in cyber, and we have about 8,000 cybersecurity professionals. I lead as Vice President of Defensive Cyber our efforts to service the DoD services with zero trust, cyber physical, and detection capabilities. Julian?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jillian Rucker. I am the Section Chief for Government Partnerships within CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, aka the JCDC. I supervise our government partnerships and operational information sharing relationships for all of our federal partners, but especially those with our federal civilian partners. Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian. And to kick off with kind of a broad question for the group, be great to get a quick understanding from each of you on what you've really seen in terms of the threat landscape evolution over the past year or so, what new trends are coming out that public sector organizations are most concerned with, or you've seen as being the biggest concerns. Maybe Jillian, you can kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in terms of what I've seen in the threat landscape across the past year and kind of what trends we're seeing is continued, right, we're continuing to see the surface attack area enhance, right, as the world becomes more and more online and, companies and our federal agencies have more space to be exposure. And so it's not so much that we see any particularly threats enhanced, although I think everybody has seen the news about the PRC activity and the Volt Typhoon and the Salt Typhoon activity that is very much at the forefront of everyone's mind, especially ours here at CISA. But really it is, I think, kind of, I don't want to say more of the same, but it's just enhanced levels and more more of the expected as we see levels of exposure become enhanced.
Thanks, Jillian. Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Jillian. I mean, it's a lot of sophistication, I'd say, that we're seeing from the threat actors. I mean, we're seeing things like, AI, which is, big buzzword everyone's talking about, that our clients are facing some threats that way. We see some supply chain, right? So there's been a lot of issues, a lot of incidents around supply chain. And then I'd also say, another thing that we're looking at and talking with our clients about is around operational technology, right? How do we really secure some of these old legacy systems from an OT perspective? So, as mentioned, it's definitely getting more complex. I mean, if you think about, 5-10 years ago, the everyday person could probably spot a spam or a phishing email. But today, I mean, they're just getting more sophisticated. I mean, a quick example, I got a phone call from the sheriff department, which I thought was real, and saying I had to open a warrant against me, but it wasn't real. I was able to kind of figure that out. But as a person who I feel like knows security pretty well, I was kind of caught for a minute. So it's just more sophistication, and with technology emerging, with AI and supply chain and operational technology, I think those are going to be the big focus areas.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I think we all see smarter and smarter emails coming to our inboxes that, hey, I get a delivery from Amazon every day. So, hey, is this my tracking order for something? Probably, right? And people are definitely getting smarter. Holly, over to you.
Yeah, so totally agree with the points that Jillian and Tyler have brought up, especially around the legacy systems. OT in particular, they were never built to handle the volume of data and the interconnectivity that we're asking out of these devices, which really begs the question, should you continue to try and duct tape these legacy systems or just scrap them and build a secure system? I mean, honestly, anyway, we'll talk about that later. It's always budgets and the color of money you can get. They can get O&M money, so they duct tape. If they could get RDT&E dollars, they would build a new system. So there's a lot broken in our federal budget process. And I could the whole 60 minutes, but I won't. One thing I did want to mention is I don't think you can talk about cybersecurity without talking about the threats and traditional geopolitical threats. Go east, go west. You know who they are. But I do think one thing that's been very disruptive this last year is just the instability in the Middle East. That we've had for the last year, that has just brought a whole other focus in addition to our traditional threat actors, and just some of it's from within the country, and some of it is external, but definitely it's been hard to manage. Looking at issues in Europe that may influence the United States. Issues in Asia, which, I mean, I started at this time last year, we were talking about the pacing threat from the Far East. And now I feel like the Middle East is a bigger headache and more imminent and more problematic for federal agencies than some of the other ones. So, yeah. The one thing I'll just tee up now is a lot of techniques around living off the land where it's super hard to detect. So wearing my detection hat, really things that look like they're standard parts of your IT maintenance, and they're nefarious. And once they're in, they're super, super hard to detect. And, I think, again, going back to a threat posture, our adversaries are just looking at the most weak link in our system. Like, I think sometimes we think that they're only going to do the elegant, full force attacks. And honestly, they really are just worming their way in, and they can wreak havoc once they're there.
Thanks, Holly. You definitely touched on a few points there that we'll get deeper into over the next 40 minutes or so. I guess, Holly, to continue on that, what are you seeing as some of the areas that, with your focus being on the DoD primarily, where are some areas where you're seeing your clients being further ahead than maybe some other areas of the federal government could be leveraging better?
Well, I do think taking more of a holistic view of threat is critical. And, not making delineations between, I'm going to use DoD phraseology, so sorry. Some of you would be never use this vocabulary, but like a weapon system, we could call it an airplane, we could call it a ship, whatever you think of as the weapon system. There's usually a lot of embedded systems within that particular asset. It could be comms, it could be the hangar that the airplane sits in. So really kind of taking a holistic end-to-end view of your threat landscape and really looking at the various entry points. I was at a 3-letter agency about a month and a half ago, and I was there to look at their HVAC system, and it happened to be near their loading docks. And it took me like 45 minutes to get through the front gate of this agency because I was, needing to badge in, et cetera, and they have tight security. But I'm telling you, the loading docks completely open. God only knows where these drivers come from. And like the HVAC system's right there, like the door to all of their, their cooling system for this massive building right there. Like if I'm a bad guy, I'm not going to try and come through your front gate. I'm just going to be your delivery person for your, whatever, linens, or whatnot, or take away your trash. So I think just really having that kind of end-to-end view is really critical. I don't think we can afford to just have IT look at this, physical security look at that. I think we've got to integrate it.
Thanks for that, Holly. That story stuck out to me when we spoke last week or so, so appreciate you sharing it. Tyler, I know your work crosses sort of all agencies. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about some areas that you're seeing some agencies being ahead of the curve compared to their peers with kind of the view you have across all of government.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on each organization. I am seeing some organizations kind of move further and faster with zero trust. I think there's definitely some good mandates out there that the government is putting out and they're actually executing on. So I think from a zero trust perspective, I see some organizations moving out a little faster than others. And same with supply chain. I mean, I know I hit on supply chain when I kicked things off, but I am seeing some organizations really stand up some very solid supply chain organizations and really put out some better monitoring of how we're going to do that. And then the third item I'll hit on is just ongoing authorization, right? I feel like that's another one where I see some organizations really focusing time and energy instead of these kind of point in time authorizations and continuous monitoring, doing it more often. And again, a continuous monitoring aspect of it. But I think one thing that, I see some organizations hit on better and being able to move faster is when they put kind of the cyber transformation terms into the mission, in the business terms. I really think, from a cyber perspective, we do sometimes see a little, cyber fatigue to a degree. I mean, we're always asking as cyber professionals for more money, new technology, but now there's new buzzwords coming out around AI and others. So I really think putting the cyber terms into the business and the mission and how we're going to enable the business and the mission is going to be critical for those folks to kind of move out on their cyber needs.
Thanks, Tyler. Great point about cyber fatigue, where it's a topic we've been talking broadly about for so long now, and the end user, the business itself, might be sick of hearing about it, not realizing the significance and how it's going to impact their ability to actually achieve mission. Jillian, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how the ways that CISA, yourself, are acting sort of as an intermediary to both ensure that you're gaining access to the best practices learned and also redistributing that information outwardly.
Yeah, so I think CISA hugely values its partnerships within the federal civilian space. And so at least within the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which is just one small but very critical part of CISA, I think opening up our pathways at a SOC to SOC level with our federal partners is kind of key. So we group our federal partners into portfolios, and each one of them has kind of an assigned personnel behind it in order to really build those relationships, in order to make sure that they're getting the relevant and key information. I think Tyler talked about kind of a little bit about the area where some agencies, I think, are ahead of others and talking about zero trust and supply chain. But I think at a more like qualitative level, you can also talk about kind of where some federal agencies are kind of ahead of the curve as far as information sharing and engaging with their federal partners. You know, cybersecurity, as we always say, is a team sport. We can't do it alone. And so it is, I think, key for federal agencies to engage with CISA, engage with our other federal three-letter partners, but engage with each other. What are we seeing? What are we doing? Because chances are you are not alone in this. CISA hosts, we call it the SOC call every Thursday for federal civilian agencies. If you're not a federal civilian agency, you can reach out to me. We do allow some other partners on that call on a very discretionary, limited basis, but it's kind of a weekly forum for us to talk about what we're seeing in the cyberspace and how to get information out there. And so it's really, really a key place to kind of be part of that information exchange.
Thanks, Jillian. And you had messaged the group on the side a few minutes ago about CISA's living off the land guide. Maybe that's a good real life example, if you mind sharing a little bit of information about that.
Yeah, I think, so as Holly had mentioned, right, and I think Tyler touched on this as well, you know, across our nation state threats, but even I think across our ransomware and our criminal type actors, we do see such enhanced levels of sophistication, even over the past couple of years, where actors aren't using things that we inherently think of malicious, kind of obvious vulnerabilities and doing a SQL injection and, you know, something that's going to set off alarm bells. They're using kind of native tools and moving laterally throughout networks in a way that is really, really difficult to detect, blending in with normal traffic, you know, using, you know, compromised US routers. So it's not showing up, you know, in as anything unusual in IT space. And it makes it really, really hard to detect. And I think our adversaries know this, and that's why they use these techniques. They may take longer, and, you know, I think you might not always get the accesses that one wants, but it allows them to, you know, live in environments for longer and gain, you know, incredible amounts of access. And so I think that level of sophistication that we're seeing from threat actors, I think is key, and it's incredibly difficult. And I think it takes, unfortunately, a really high level of maturity for a cyber organization to be able to detect and mitigate that activity. Because how can you mitigate, you know, what you can't see, or how do you separate, you know, the wheat from the chaff, the abnormal from the adversarial? And so that guidance, hopefully, I think, kind of takes off some of that level of thinking of the ways that one can go about doing that and start thinking about and conducting that activity. But I think it's a huge challenge we at CISA and with a lot of our kind of cyber partners think about every day in and day out.
Thanks, Jillian. And Holly, you brought up living off the land earlier, and you referred to it as the pacing threat when you and I spoke last week. Do you mind sharing a little bit about some strategies that you've seen for identifying those quickly, or how to react quickly when those are identified?
So let me just be clear. I probably said like 6 things and they bled together. So when I say pacing threat, and sorry to be very pointed, but I mean China as a threat actor. So I think that's kind of DoD parlance, if you will. So some people may not do DoD work, but they tend to call that the pacing threat, which is why I said earlier that like the Middle East has become a little bit more in focus for some of my customers. But one of the things that we've been working with a customer on, and we actually had a successful prototype earlier this year. One part of the DoD was really having living off the land challenges, super hard to identify. So we actually deployed an agentic AI capability where you put out AI agents to go study a problem set. And then it brings the pieces back together and you kind of put together a mosaic. And sometimes the mosaic sees things when the micro is put together that you don't see from a top-down macro view. And so we kind of played a little game. The customer embedded like a dozen living off the land problems in a sanitized data set that we looked at. And we had like a 90% effectiveness rate of identifying the living off the land by using agentic AI. So look, these problems are hard, and I think that the intersection of AI and cybersecurity are no longer two parallel standalone system or standalone solution sets. I think that a lot of organizations are moving to AI as just sort of table stakes. It's like we use Microsoft Office and we use AI. I know that's kind of silly, but most people use Word, we use Excel, there's standard tools that we use. So I think AI is just in our toolbox as cybersecurity professionals. And I think that we can ask AI harder and harder things, and they can the agents can get at problems that are almost humanly impossible to sort through. So what we're now doing is scaling. And once we identify a living off the land technique, one of the things that we do is we take those insights and we apply them broadly across our broader client set. Because typically, if it's, if the Army's been compromised, then it's likely that that same technique was used on the Navy, was used on the Marines, was used against CISA, Treasury, whomever. And so I feel like one thing that, like Booz is not a perfect company, but I did say we're big. And so I think one thing our scale affords us is tremendous insight, and we work hard on information sharing so that all of our clients benefit from insights that we've gained. We have a couple mechanisms that we leverage to do that. I lead something that we call our Cyber TXG, and we constantly are having focus groups on different topics where we can get after some robust information sharing. But, not all of Booz Allen's clients are federal. And so the kind of the crosstalk between our commercial business and our federal business, whether it's DoD, Intel, or civilian agency, is fairly rich. The one thing Booz Allen does not do, we do not do state and local work, so we don't contribute to the narrative there. But yeah, I think that that's super important. If we're really going to turn the corner, the threat-based intelligence and making sure that that intelligence is democratized in a way that whether you're a tiny little agency like, I don't know, the National Institute of Health, or I don't know, whoever. I think I just made up the agency name. But you know what I mean? There's some that are teeny tiny and there's some that are super big. And if we can just make that information sharing more broad, I think that that's probably the best service that we can provide to the federal government.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Shifting gears a bit, Tyler, I know you spoke last week and then a little bit earlier about a lot of work in zero trust space. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what role does a strong zero trust architecture play in really making sure that the agency's resilience is very strong? What are some key strategies that make that effective, especially thinking about larger organizations that have a lot of different moving parts and people working on a lot of different things?
Yeah, I think the big thing about zero trust, some people just think it's a technology play, right? It's not just a technology play. You're not just going to buy technology and be successful. The way that we look at it is that it's a transformation. And that means that it's going to take, technology, it's going to take security people, it's going to take architectural people, and so on and so forth. So really being able to stand up, what we call really finding a quarterback for zero trust and standing up as either governance or PMO to really oversee your zero trust approach. Because we've seen agencies like, oh, I'm just going to buy this tool, I'm going to go buy that tool, and I'm going to go buy that tool and try and hit it, individually, rather than having this more holistic approach to how we're going to manage zero trust. Because if you think about it, zero trust is more than just security, right? I mean, it's architecture, it's IT, it's people. So being able to have, if you're going to go to the same people 4 different times asking the same questions because it's 4 different zero trust projects, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, and it's going to frustrate the end user and the potentially the system owner and the app owner, the ones who are really probably doing the hands-on keyboard of zero trust. So from our perspective, it's really understanding that this is a transformation and that you have to get buy-in from your people, and you have to make sure that you have the right governance and PMO approach to say, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to manage it, and this is how it's going to be effective. And I also think, not just from an application perspective and a system perspective, but also the end user, right? Security is always looked at to be the bad person, the person who says no, or the person late in the game is like, oh, I don't want you to do that. Right. As I mentioned before, our job is to enable the business to move faster. And the best way to do that is to educate and collaborate with our folks. I mean, KPMG implemented zero trust a couple of years ago, and I get tons of log in here or two-factor authentication all this time. It's definitely could be annoying at times, but I think we need to get to a place where it's like when you go to the airport and you go through security, it's just like you just do it. You don't even like think second hand about it. So really, with zero trust is having those PMO, having the governance, making it a people component, and making sure our end users are well educated on it.
Thanks, Tyler. And I'm actually going to jump down a little bit on our agenda because you touched on a few points there. And maybe Jillian, I'll pose this question your way. Thinking about how can different public sector organizations improve the awareness and the training aspect of zero trust or other initiatives to sort of reduce that human error, and how do you kind of help create that culture?
Well, that is a great question. I think I will first touch on, I think one of the things that Tyler said that I very much agree with, right, is that I think the concept of zero trust very much is it's not a sales gimmick. It's not something new to buy. It truly is, I think, both like a theoretical philosophy as well as a methodology about everything that you do in cybersecurity, from the way you set up your network to the way you look at your vendor contracts, to the way you train your employees, right? Kind of, there was a poll that came out in earlier in this panel that kind of said, like, which of these things do you think is the most important? And I wasn't allowed to vote in the poll, but I was reading through the poll, and I was like, well, all of these are important, because if you don't have good information sharing, then you have nothing to put in your tools. If you don't have the tooling, right, you have nothing to do with the information, and if your people aren't trained. And so I really think that kind of way of thinking is totally reflected into zero trust. Yes, that's the one I'm talking about. The poll is that, none of those things work without one another. And so then I think in terms of, training and integrating it into an organization, one has to think about, the zero trust philosophy like that. And so it starts from the ground up. It starts from, procurement, and how are you going about doing, your contracting, both for personnel and, for hardware, software. I think that is really key. And although it's, a different theoretical concept, I think looking at CISA's guidance around secure by design and the kind of requirements that we have pushed and put in place there kind of are a baseline that have, different philosophies, but kind of a similar goal of, we want to create environments and networks that are inherently secure, and that we take into account a lot of these problems ahead of time, whether it be common vulnerabilities and misconfigurations for secure by design versus, with zero trust, the way networks talk to each other and how information flows. And so webbing those together as we build things up, is key. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I kind of went on a tangent, but I had a lot to say.
No, thanks, Jillian. Valuable, and glad we popped the poll results back up there for the group and the speakers.
Yeah, and
Um,
James, if I can jump in, I mean, I completely agree with Jillian. I mean, just the training component aspect, and you'll hear a lot from me about people, right? I mean, we can't be successful. We'll have the best technology, we'll have the best cyber defenders, but if we don't have the right people, either in security or people who are dedicated about security and understand the importance of security, we're just going to fail. And I think, to get our broader community more involved, more educated, because as we kick things off, I mean, it's just getting more and more sophisticated. So we need to have more trainings. We need to test our capabilities. We had a client, we did a tabletop exercise, and it was eye-opening to the client and to us that, like, people didn't really know who was making decisions or who to kind of communicate with when there's urgent issues and questions and so on and so forth. So I think really from a security perspective, the education, the training our folks, and then doing it over and over again, not just do it one time, do it often. But I also think, pushing out more trainings to the end users and to our, the everyday folks that are really that first layer of security. Our internal security folks put out a pretty interesting security training video. It was all based on SNL, right? It was like an SNL set for security, and they had like your typical intro to SNL and like a different skit. I mean, it was like, I can't tell you, I had nothing to do with the video or the training, but I can't tell you how many people were like, wow, that was like a really funny, like exciting kind of video, and got people's attention rather than taking the same cybersecurity training over and over again and leaving it on one screen and not really paying attention. So I think we need to get more sophisticated and more interesting kind of trainings out there to get people more like, hey, this is something I can kind of get behind.
I wish that was my cybersecurity training. Tyler would have, like you said, don't tell our CTO, but yeah, definitely. I think everybody's kind of has it on the side on their other screen, like you mentioned, and is trying to get it done and get back to their day job. Holly, maybe I'll pose this question your way. When you think about when there is an incident, right? When there is a successful attack, how can public sector organizations be best prepared for both rapid response and recovery there, but also ensuring sort of business continuity as that's taking place?
Yeah, I love that you ended with business continuity because it's something you plan for, you drill, and you practice. And so it's having well, first of all, are you backing up your systems on a regular basis? Just a lot of it is just your good technology hygiene and you're executing that. But also, clearly you want to isolate the problem. You may have to take part of your organization offline. And by the way, even with my pesky little DoD clients, it may mean grounding a plane. And if we're not at war, it's not going to be a crisis. It's going to be okay. And then you learn from those situations, but obviously mitigating it, but doing a lot of practice. I like, although we were talking about training and influencing human behavior, it's got to be part of your culture, that readiness and that ability to pivot when there is a crisis. And by the way, some of the things that happen to our system are not, politically motivated or hacker centric. I mean, we just went through hurricanes. There's a lot of federal assets in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, as an example. And so, I know we were working with one customer who had a very Florida-centric operation, and we're like, okay, so for the next several days, we're pivoting, and we're going to run that out of Colorado. Like, if nothing else, the people in Florida, just whether the system was taken down, they probably just needed to deal with their own stuff. But we had practiced that. We already knew many years ago, and I can say this now because time is our friend, but we were doing an assessment on the banking and finance infrastructure, and the backup the backup site for the New York Stock Exchange was in New Jersey on the same power grid. And so that was one of our findings. Like, you got to geo separate these things. And so, I do think that sense of readiness, I do think doing tabletop exercises where you run through scenarios so people know this is who I call, this is how we flip our processes. just becomes part of your muscle memory. I don't think there's any federal agency that would not benefit from thinking through their COOP and their backup strategies. You know, I remember once, and again, years ago, I always will publicly shame clients after they fix something. But back in the day, maybe 15 years ago, I was talking to NASA and I was talking to them about cybersecurity, and they're like, oh, confidentiality is not a thing. We publish all of our data. We're very transparent. And I'm like, well, confidentiality may not be a thing, but integrity is. If I move a decimal point on one of your calculations that determines your launch, you know, the whole thing could blow up. So, you know, a lot of it is just enculturing in people a sense of it's not if something's going to happen, but when something's going to happen, and the devil might be in the details. But we have a way to press forward with business continuity. And, you know, it's got to be exactly like Tyler said. You go through an airport, you know, you're going to go through a magnetometer. It might be stupid. You might have to take off your shoes. You got to take your water bottle out. That's kind of dumb. But these are the things that we do, and everyone knows it. I'm sure most of the folks on this call, you know, we all have those elderly relatives who, if you even know how to spell cyber, they'll call you on every little thing. You know, my mom will be like, do you think this is a phishing email? I'm like, oh my God, Mom, yes, of course, you know. So things that are totally obvious to us and aren't obvious to, you know, like some people that are outside the fold, you know, people are not unable to learn. It's just that I think we have to change our culture that business continuity, cyber hygiene, and data protection are just a part of our normal business dialogue, and not something that we just talk about when we're trying to reconstitute a system.
Thanks, Holly. Really interesting, and love getting those phone calls from my older family members for sure. Tyler, I don't know if you want to add to that. I know when we spoke, you also talked a lot about kind of picking your quarterback and the leadership that's required for this to kind of act successfully and smoothly. So do you want to talk a little bit about response and yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think Holly's spot on, right? I mean, you gotta just practice, and it has to be muscle memory, right? When there's an incident. But I think the important thing before that is really understanding your assets, your high value assets, and your mission essential functions, right? Like if the business can't prioritize what needs to be fixed first, then we have a problem, right? And I think that needs to be looked at often. You know, I know with continuity of operations, you got to do your BIA, BPA every couple of years. But that's just a critical component of, hey, something is happening. What do we prioritize, or what do we need to have a backup system for? Right? We can't back up everything, right? So, what is our risk approach to continuity of operations, to cyber incidents? So I'm a big proponent, sounds like Holly as well, of continuity of operations, and it could be anything, as she mentioned. It's not just cyber. I mean, look at the CrowdStrike incident that happened a couple months ago. I had clients down for 24, 48 hours plus when they had big things that they had to do, right? So it's really understanding your mission essential functions, your supporting essential functions, prioritizing that as a business, and then working with the IT shop and security to say, all right, we can live with X, Y, and Z being down for 48, 72 hours. We cannot live with D, E, and F down for 2 to 3 hours. So how do we prioritize that, and how do we invest in that? Is, I think, to me, kind of the most important piece. And then we will also have kind of the trainings and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Tyler. And Jillian, over to you. And I'd love for you to add to the conversation as well. I know part of CISA's responsibility and your teams is not just coordinating with federal agencies, but also state and local and some international partners. So I'd love for you to kind of add to this conversation, but also about how learning from all those different organization types helps, push the needle forward.
Yeah, I think Holly touched on this a little bit, right? That chances are, I mean, there is obviously some threat activity that we see that is hyper targeted, but I think for the most part, right, we are seeing kind of cyber activity in one place, chances are you're seeing it in another. And so I think organizations, whether that be our state local partners or whether that be our international cyber emergency readiness partners, I think sharing information is always super key, because it allows us to amplify it, and it means that others then can drive down that risk in a similar manner to the way that you have. And so I think that's one of the key strengths of CISA and the key strengths of the JCDC, is we are all about that public-private partnership, and the public partnership doesn't stop at the federal government. It kind of goes across all three of those partner sets. And so I think together, through information sharing and through kind of being collaborative and strategic and setting up communication channels, we continue to drive down risk. So it's right. Like, I think it's if a cyber attack happened and you don't tell anyone about it, it's the same thing as if the tree fell in the woods. And so it's really how we drive down risk is through sharing.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, so and you're all like, oh my God, where's she going to go with this? I'll keep it narrow. The one thing no one's talking about in this election is how toxic CR has been on the government's ability to effectively serve the nation. And, I feel for people like Julian and other government officials who, Tyler wants to lead transformation with these customers and they all need it and they all want it. But transformation doesn't happen in a government fiscal year that is delayed in starting because CR means you don't even get new funding until 4 months, 6 months into the year. And then, so we always do stupid. We do stupid and we're not strategic and we're not thoughtful, not because agencies don't know what to do and they don't have a perspective of where to start. It's, you got to have funding and you've got to have that continuous flow of funding. And so it's very imbalanced, but I think it is the number one thing that is keeping us from really getting after really scalable, sticky solutions that will really make us a force to be reckoned with on an international stage. So instead, we're always in triage and we're always like chipping away at the margins and really doing the hard work of transformation. Look, we gotta just set aside, political acrimony over when it comes to budget. Like, we have to put the agendas of these agencies ahead of any one little political gain or loss we think we might incur by playing this CR budget game. And so if I had a public mic and was talking to Joe Q Public, it would be the number one thing that I would be demanding from political candidates is that they stop stupid.
Thanks, Holly. We'll see how many people are tuned into the webinar to see how much of a difference your position makes. Tyler, I know when we spoke, and you touched a little bit a minute ago, Tyler, around sort of prioritization and thinking about the CR or just organizations that have limited budget. You talked last week about whack-a-mole in some areas, right? And I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on all those things together, right? Whether it's the CR or just organizations that have less budget than others and how they prioritize.
Yeah, I think the big thing there is, a lot of times we see our clients are buying the same thing over and over again, right? So places that maybe have limited budgets, it's really understanding your infrastructure, understanding your environment, understanding the tools you have, because a lot of these tools are great, but a lot of them do the same thing. So if you leverage maybe one tool that you're only leveraging 10%, but if you leverage it 80, 90%, you may save money on licensing fees on 4 or 5 other tools, right? So it's really, I think, understanding what your environment is and where you're going as a security organization. And I think from a smaller organization, I think if we've hit it a couple of times, the big thing is also collaboration, because what Jillian does is, there's great ways to share information, right? There's great ways to work with other entities within the government to say what has worked well and what hasn't. And I think similar to what Holly has mentioned as well, what we do a lot is we bring in our federal practice, but we also bring in our commercial practice, right? So, hey, this has been very successful at a small, maybe even regulated financial organization, Fortune 500 company, and we have a similar type of organization in the government, right? That's having the same problems, right? So really around the collaboration and bringing not just federal components but also commercial and state and local aspects together to say this is how we solve this problem together, and this is how we've done it before, so that small organization that maybe has a limited budget isn't doing it from scratch, right? They have lessons learned and they know where to get started. And I think the other thing too is, as I mentioned before, with this kind of cyber fatigue to a degree, it's getting harder and harder to ask for more money around cyber. I think some of the mandates around zero trust and now AI, some funded, some not. But I think being able to kind of enable the business, as I mentioned earlier. So, hey, there's this large, we want to do an HR transformation, or we want to do a ITSM transformation within our organization. There is always going to be a cybersecurity piece to any IT modernization effort. And usually that's not thought of until the very end. And it's like, oh, let me rush to get my resources and get the system online. And it's like, well, if we would have started earlier, it wouldn't be a rush and we would probably be more on time. But I think, a CISO or a CIO can integrate into those large transformations. So make sure they have a seat at the table within the organizations when there are large transformations happening, and maybe getting some cyber budget, through those angles. Like, we're spending X money on this transformation. Well, 10-15% of that needs to be focused on cyber. So I think there's different ways to think about it and get creative. But again, I think the big thing is the collaboration, lessons learned, and making sure you're looking holistically and bringing it all together rather than just kind of siloed in your piece.
Thanks, Tyler. And Jillian, I know when we spoke, you talked a little bit about agencies that have less funding and what CISA tries to do to help those agencies. Maybe now's a good time for you to share a little bit of information there.
Yeah, I think Holly, I'll mention this, Holly was talking a little bit about kind of the number of small agencies. I said my personal favorite micro agency is the Marine Mammals Commission. I also like the Antarctic Research Corporation. These agencies that I think sometimes only have federal staff in the single digits, and ultimately are some of our most challenging partners at CISA because, just because they're small doesn't mean that they're not critical parts of the United States infrastructure, and that they hold critical data that might be, number one, attractive to foreign adversaries, but then also number two, essential to the U.S. public in some way where that availability comes in hand. And so, I think the number one thing CISA does is try to build relationships with them, try to let them know that we're here and we're available for those contacts. But I think secondly is that a lot of this information and stuff is public. CISA puts out known exploited vulnerabilities catalog that's updated continually about what we know is going on in this space, what is actually being exploited here and now in real time, where we have evidence of. And so, that information is available to them. And I think it's, key for them, and it's required by federal agencies via Binding Operational Directive 2201 for them to pass on that. And so making sure that they're following those known exploited vulnerability catalogs, making sure that they're getting information, as I mentioned, from the CISA staff call, and then I think making sure that they're taking advantage of kind of the services that CISA offers for free, like our cyber hygiene and vulnerability scanning, like some of our kind of more selective services, like our protective DNS and our web firewall application firewall scanning that's kind of available to a smaller number of entities, as well as that we do have, incident response capabilities in certain circumstances for the federal government. And so really, I think making sure that they are engaged and aware of those things, that it's not necessarily going to cost them really any money or any personnel, but that they're, we're here from them. We can be that connection and plug into the rest of the federal government to provide that support.
Thanks, Jillian. Shifting gears a little bit, because I know we only have 10 minutes or so left, but everyone has mentioned AI at some point during their conversation today. So maybe we'll go around the room quickly and hear a little bit about how you're seeing the balance of adopting emerging technologies like AI or machine learning, but also being prepared for the risks that may come from adopting those new technologies. Maybe Tyler, if you want to kick off for this one.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent of emerging technologies. I mean, our adversaries are using them, so we have to use them. And I'm a big proponent of leaning in, right? So, I know a lot of CISOs and cyber folks are very risk averse, but I think that's good, right? And that's needed. But I think at the same time, we need to balance that with kind of pushing the envelope a little bit and helping our clients understand the importance of this technology, right? I mean, AI obviously is a great point. I mean, Holly had a great example of how they kind of piloted AI and it was successful. I have a lot of conversations with CISOs where they're even nervous to say AI because they're like, I don't even know what data's in there. I don't know how to operate that, in my environment, right? So I think we got to find that balance of being risk averse but also leaning in and pushing the envelope with emerging technology because it's, like I mentioned, our adversaries are using it. If we don't use it, then we're going to be behind the games, and that could be said with AI, that could be said with operational technology, and so on and so forth. So I mean, there's great use cases around AI or around your SOC, right, and managing incidents. But we got to lean in. We got to push the envelope, and we got to show our clients that what the benefit is, and it could potentially outweigh the risk, if needed.
So I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I do think I am the oldest panelist. So there you go. I was in graduate school. This is scary. Before computers had mice, and I was getting an MBA in finance, and we used to actually use calculators. And it was like a big deal. Like if you weren't going to look something up in a table, there was this whole chatter around, oh my God, should we let our MBA students use financial calculator? I mean, the whole thing's a joke now. Like professors just hand you a spreadsheet with the logic now. But back in the day, it was a really big deal. And were we going to be good analysts if we couldn't do everything longhand? So fast forward, no one, I mean, like it's just laughable, like to think that we were scared of calculators, right? Or can students take the SAT and use a calculator for the math? So I kind of feel like in 20 years, we're going to laugh at AI that way. So right now, we just kind of don't understand it. And so look, AI is as good as the data that is being generated in the AI, the veracity of that data, and the fact that it hasn't been altered or manipulated. And so there are some serious concerns that we have to get after. However, make no mistake, the AI bow wave has been released. It is coming, it is there, it is now. If you talk to anyone in high school or college today, it is table stakes in the way they think about problem solving. All of these things are tools. And so I feel like in the realm of cyber, and for those of us that are more mature, and I think I'm probably the most mature, oldest, well, I may not be the most mature. I think I'm the oldest person on the call. We just have to lean in, but lean in smartly. And so I think that there's a lot of power in AI. And I think that it's going to embed its way into all parts of our business, all of our processes. I think it will be as innovative as we thought financial calculators were in the 80s or Excel was in the 90s, or, I mean, I remember when we were going to, the .com era in the late 90s. I mean, all of this seems like a big deal at the time. I think it'll shake out. I'm sure I'm being overly optimistic. I'm not saying there won't be challenges, but yeah, I mean, to Tyler's point, our adversaries are using AI. I don't think we have a choice. I don't think we can sit on the sidelines and debate. I think we just have to lean in. But Julian, I appreciate your perspective.
No, I think especially this is when we talk to our IC partners a lot, and I think it goes back to Tyler said that like AI is only as good as like the data that's available, and I think so much of the current threat of AI is just enhanced versions of the current threats as we understand them. So it's not necessarily, yes, it's a new capability, but our threat actors gain new and different capabilities in many different ways constantly. And so I think it's just evaluating about how your network is protected, and how you respond to intrusions. And I don't want to say less about how they're doing them, but realizing that AI is just a piece of that puzzle, and not necessarily the be all end all. Something I think about a lot. I think it also goes back to what we were talking about the importance of training and developing, and I think educating your staff, just as we've kind of over the years kind of conditioned people on phishing emails, and just as we train our cybersecurity staff to look for malicious or suspicious activity, although we talked about how that's become more difficult over time. I think it's also kind of training people, both cybersecurity professionals and the general public, about what AI looks like and how to kind of separate it. I know people that are say that they only wear patterns now in things that are filmed and photographed, because it's harder to replicate via AI. And I'm like, love a black turtleneck, so I don't know if I'm gonna go that far. But it's kind of, I think, educating people about, when content and images and information is made by artificial intelligence, what are the things to look out for? And so I think it's a whole different bucket of education that is, I think, critical to mitigating the way it can be used as a threat. There is, James, a question in the chat for me. I don't know if you want me to answer it now or.
I was going to ask. I think it's actually a nice time to answer that. So yeah, go ahead, Jillian. How would CISA recommend, or how do you yourselves attract talent? Thinking about emerging technology, how do you bring the best talent in, and how do you recommend other departments do so?
Yeah, I mean, definitely also with like the Holly Tyler for these answers. I think definitely this is a, I don't want to say a struggle, but definitely a challenge. And for CISA in and of ourselves, it is, extremely difficult, especially in government salaries, to hire and recruit and retain people once they've gotten trained. CISA has kind of some enhanced retention programs like our cyber pay program, and as well as the cyber talent management system, CTMS, that kind of help matches CISA salaries based on, kind of technical skilling, more in line with the private sector. But, that's certainly not for everybody, and that requires, I think, as Holly talked to, years and years of budgetary and planning to get something like that off the ground. I've been at CISA for almost 8 years, and I think they started talking about the CTMS program when I first started, and it really only got off the ground 2 years ago. So, 5-6 years it took to get kind of spending like that off the ground. And so I do not have any really advice. I'm not a human resources professional, other than I think we're hugely aware of the challenge that it is. And I guess my own advice is that I think cybersecurity is a group sport. It takes all kinds. I think we inherently, when we're trying to hire cyber professionals, look for, tech wizards and people who are wonderful at the ones and zeros and can comb through a silk query like, the back of their hand. But so many of those technical skills, I think, I don't want to say are overvalued, but can be overcomplicated and I think made light of. But they can be taught. People can be trained. There's tons and tons of technical trainings available, but what can't be trained, I think, is a readiness and willingness to share, a strength in communication. And so I think ultimately when you look at that talent gap, hey, this person might not necessarily, know how to work with Tenable, or might not have, comfortable combing through CrowdStrike Falcon data. But, if they have some exposure to this space and are willing and ready to learn, so you don't necessarily have to look at like the traditional IT professionals, because there's so much more to it than that. And you can get people trained on the hard tech. It's much easier to train someone on the hard tech than to take someone who has great hard tech skills and make them a great communicator, in my experience.
I'll just add to that. I think we can apply a DE&I lens to the whole challenge with, workforce and need to scale it. I work with Metro State University in Denver, And we actually have a cybersecurity cohort for the neurodiverse. It's an amazing element within our population. And by the way, it's not super small. And we want these people to have meaningful lives and careers. And they are wonderful candidates for certain aspects of our cybersecurity ecosystem. And they're absolutely wonderful employees. They train a little different. It may take them a minute longer to learn a couple aspects of cybersecurity, but I think it's casting a broader net on and giving people a sense of that they too can do this. Most young people pursue careers based on the people in their immediate circle. And if you've never known a cybersecurity professional, you couldn't necessarily project that you could ever do that. You've seen a fireman, you've seen a nurse, you know what little kids say, what they want to be when they grow up. And so I think that there's a wonderful opportunity to cast a broader.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Jillian. We're right up on time. I want to give each of the panelists a quick 30-second closing thought on what do you think the most important thing is, whether it's characteristics of the most effective leaders that you've worked with, or top priorities for near future investments that government should be making. I just want to give about 30 seconds each for kind of closing thoughts from the group. Maybe Jillian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I'll take the effective leader question. I think I have two things to mention in that, and that is I'm lucky enough at CISA, right? An agency, we're so secure, we say it twice in our name, that cybersecurity is inherently our mission. But I think for most of the federal agencies, right, you guys have other mission and business needs. And so I think when you're looking for effective cybersecurity leaders, I think looking for people that, number one, are skilled at being able to tie and communicate cybersecurity to that mission need. That is, I think, the way people are successful. That is the way they're getting funding. Holly mentioned the color of money early in this call. I think when you have people who can articulate those needs to the agency goals, and ultimately can align strategic funding and strategic priorities to support that, I think that is really key. I think another really key effective trait of cybersecurity leaders are those that are able to, I think, separate the important and impactful from the non-important and impactful. People that can understand, and it doesn't necessarily have to be from a technical perspective, what actual cyber events are going to have impact either here or down the road, versus what is a blip on the screen. Yes, something like a DDoS can be inherently frustrating, but I think it's something that can probably be, and worked out in a couple phone calls with your internet service provider. Whereas a nation state compromise, can take years to come back from, and a network that you can never have, really be secure again. And so I think someone who can kind of separate those two things and make decisions from that, I think is key. But those are my thoughts today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks very much, Jillian. Tyler, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I really like what Jillian said. I mean, as I mentioned before, security enables the business, right? It enables the business to move faster. So if you are personally, driving on a very curvy road, are you going to go faster if there's guardrails on it or no guardrails on it? Probably you'll go faster if there's guardrails on it, right? So that's our job as security professionals, is to enable the business to move faster. And I think similar to what Jillian said, is having leaders that can tell that story and show how our strategy, our implementation is going to help the business move faster is very positive and going to be very effective. I think the other aspect I'll add, and we hit it on a bunch today, is around collaboration. We have to remember CISOs and CIOs and security professionals, we're not just doing, shouldn't be thinking of just what they're doing in their silo, right? You need to collaborate with kind of what Jillian is doing at CISA, collaborate with industry about what's happening in the federal space, what's happening in state, local space, and what's happening in the commercial space. Because a lot of the times, some of it might be somewhat similar. And a lot of the stuff in the commercial side of Fortune 100 companies might be happening first than before the government, or vice versa. So really having that leader who can enable the business, sell that message, and collaborate everywhere, I think would be a successful leader and can help their program be more secure.
Thanks, Tyler. And Holly, to close us out.
In the interest of time, I think I'm just going to wish everyone a great day. I think we've unpacked some terrific topics, and I like the notion of cybersecurity being a team sport. So we'll end with that.
Thanks very much, Holly. Thanks very much to the panelists for the time this afternoon. Thanks to all the attendees. I hope you all found it valuable. We'll be putting together some thoughts and sending it out to the attendees after this. But appreciate everybody's time and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.